Okay, so are you ready to dive deep into the world of David Peterson? Because this composer, uh, he's going to seriously make you rethink what music even is.
Oh, I am so ready. And you weren't kidding about this stack of source
It
material.
wasn't.
I mean, scores, notes, writings about Martian archaeology. Talk
Yeah.
about
Right,
range.
eclectic doesn't even begin to describe it. But okay, let's start with what immediately grabbed my attention. A Taoist Requiem.
Oh,
I mean, that title alone, it's like,
it's amazing, right?
it's huge, yeah.
You've got the whole weight of the Requiem tradition, the Mass for the Dead, and then bam, Taoism. It's like he's setting up this incredible clash of cultures, or at least a really interesting conversation.
Totally. And then on top of that, to make it even more interesting, this Requiem, no words,
Yeah.
it's all instrumental and choral, no lyrics at all.
Which adds a whole other dimension to listening to it, don't you think? It's
Right.
like a traditional requiem, the text guides you along, but here it's just pure emotion through the music.
It's true.
Peterson actually mentions in his notes that he used tonality and modal scales specifically to create this otherworldly kind of feeling.
Okay, wait, hold on. For those of us who maybe slept through Music Theory 101, what exactly does that mean?
Mhm.
Like tonality, modal scales. Break it down.
Totally. So tonality, you can think of it as that system of major and minor keys that we're used to in Western music
Okay.
that gives it that structure, that familiar sound. It's what makes a piece sound happy or sad.
Right.
But modal scales are more ancient. They have roots in medieval music, even Greek music, and they just create a totally different feeling, something less bound by those traditional Western harmonies.
Ah, so he's kind of bridging musical worlds, it sounds like.
Exactly.
Blending the familiar with something almost mystical.
Yes. And it gets even cooler. He talks about going for these challenging textural contrasts, which, if you ask me, just means get ready for a wild ride. Think stark, almost empty moments, and then suddenly these huge layered sections.
Oh, wow. Okay, so he's playing with our expectations, keeping us on our toes.
Totally.
And speaking of challenging, we can't forget about the singers. This piece demands a lot, vocally.
Oh, absolutely. Especially that Cohen he throws in for the men's chorus. He's basically asking them to hit these incredibly low notes, almost outside the normal vocal range.
He's pushing those boundaries.
Classic Peterson.
So we've talked about the title, this really unusual sound world he creates, but what about the structure of the Taoist Requiem? How does it all come together?
Okay, so imagine a journey, which makes sense for a requiem, right? It's divided into two main sections, 8 parts in total. Section I is all about death, that yin energy, if you're familiar with Taoist thought.
And for those who aren't.
So we're talking about yin and yang, right? Those fundamental, opposing but complementary forces in Taoism.
Right.
Yin being the darker, receptive, feminine principle, while yang is light, active, masculine.
Okay, got it. So section I, we're in that yin energy, that darkness.
Yeah. And each of the 8 parts has a title taken directly from Peterson's own translation of the Tao Te Ching.
Wait a minute, he translated the Tao Te Ching himself. Talk about dedication.
Right. It just shows how deeply he's thinking about these ideas.
Yeah.
But back to those titles, they're like signposts, guiding us through the emotional journey of the music. We start with emptiness, then futile words, death withered and dry. It's heavy stuff.
It sounds intense.
And to make sure we get the point, we then have, and strong rains do not last the day. I mean, just reading that title, you can practically hear the music, feel that drama building.
Like a storm brewing.
He is the master of creating those images with sound. He even describes that section as a storm of dissonance. And remember, this is all without a single word being sung. He's conveying this emotional turmoil, the eventual peace, all through the music itself.
Wow. Okay, so we reach the end of section I, the death part of this Taoist Requiem, and it ends in silence. That feels important. What comes after that kind of stillness?
That's where the real beauty of the piece comes in. You see, it's cyclical, mirroring those cycles of life and death, of growth and decay that are so central to Taoism. Section 2, that's where the yang energy enters. That's renewal.
So we're coming out of that darkness, that silence after the storm. Give me a sense of this resurgence in section 2. What's the musical landscape like now?
Okay, so imagine this. Part 5, which is titled, "A Tree as Large as Your Embrace Grows from a Tiny Seedling," emerges from that silence. And it's like dawn breaking. After a long, long night, we go from emptiness to this potential, this tiny musical seed.
Okay, I'm really feeling his mastery of imagery now. It's like I can hear the music starting small, delicate, then growing.
Yes. Peterson says the melody enlists more instruments as it goes on, like rings being added to a tree trunk over time. That sense of slow, steady growth, it's such a powerful contrast to that intensity of section we were talking about.
And that feels so, I don't know, quintessentially Taoist, doesn't it? This emphasis on the natural world, on gradual change, balance. He's not just like slapping a title on each movement. He's weaving these ideas right into the music itself.
Absolutely. And it gets even deeper as we move into part 6. Becoming sick of sickness throws off sickness. Now we're talking about finding peace, letting go of suffering.
Which I'm guessing is not conveyed through like gentle harpsichord music at this point.
Not quite. Okay, picture this. Each instrument starts in this cacophony, almost chaotic, right?
Mhm.
Mirroring that turmoil of like a mind in distress. But then systematically, each instrument is entrained and then dissipated. Their chaos kind of merging into this unified piece.
Wow, so he's musically mimicking that process of quieting the mind?
Yeah. Yes.
Those racing thoughts, calming down as you reach a meditative state that's next level composing right there.
It really is. He's translating these abstract philosophical concepts into this really visceral sonic experience. And then it gets even more interesting. Part 7, sometimes game through loss. This is where he throws a curveball.
Okay, hit me. What's he doing now?
He starts bringing back musical themes from earlier in the piece.
Wait, so we're hearing echoes of those earlier movements now, like musical ghosts of what we've already experienced.
Exactly. But, and here's the really important part, the tone has shifted. He describes it as brighter, with a sense of acceptance now, even playfulness woven into those familiar melodies. It's like he's saying, yes, there was loss, there was grief, but we're integrating it now, finding a new way to look at those experiences.
Okay, now I'm really on the edge of my seat. How does he bring this all home? What happens in part 8, the way?
This is where it gets really amazing. Remember that emptiness section way back at the beginning?
Yeah.
The music of part 8? It directly mirrors that opening movement.
No way. So it's musically cyclical,
Yes.
just like those Taoist principles of life, death, renewal that we talked about.
Exactly. But it's not a simple repeat. Peterson uses what he calls ethereal harmonies this time around. So it's like the same musical DNA, but changed by the journey we've just taken. It signals a completion, a return to emptiness, but it's an emptiness full of understanding now.
So it's not just that we've come full circle back to a place of peace, but that going through those darker, difficult emotions has completely changed how we experience that peace now.
Exactly. And his final note on this section is really what got me. He says, in the crucible of grief, the problem of emptiness somehow becomes its own solution.
Wow. There's a lot to unpack there.
Right.
That he brings it back to emptiness, such a core idea in Taoism. He's saying that by facing those tough emotions head on, by embracing that void, that's how we find a new way to be within it.
It's really profound, and it speaks to the power of what Peterson's doing here. He's not just writing music, he's crafting these, I don't know, sonic meditations on life, death, and everything in between.
Oh, I love that. And let's not forget that final twist he throws in. The very last note of the entire Requiem, played on the flute, it's identical to the first note of the whole piece.
Exactly. It's cyclical not just in the themes, the emotions, but in the literal sound structure of the piece itself. It's like an invitation to start the journey all over again, to re-enter that cycle, but with a deeper understanding.
It's like he created this perfect musical Mobius strip, you know?
Yeah.
It's constantly evolving, but always returning back to where it began. Which, when you think about it, is kind of how we experience things like grief and loss in life. It's not linear. There are cycles within cycles.
Precisely. And that actually brings us to the really fascinating part about all of this. This exploration of all these different influences, this blending of seemingly totally unrelated things, it's not just limited to the Taoist Requiem. When you look at Peterson's wider body of work, there's a pattern here.
So we're talking about a composer who's drawing inspiration from ancient Chinese philosophy, exploring these themes of death and renewal with his wordless choral music. And then he throws in Martian archaeology. It's like he's some kind of musical Indiana Jones, but instead of chasing down lost artifacts, he's going after ideas through sound.
I love that. And you know what? Maybe that is the key to really getting Peterson. It's not just about the music itself. It's about the exploration, right? That journey through all these different cultures and philosophies, different ways of understanding the world. And who knows, maybe even different worlds, literally.
Right. I mean, composing music inspired by Martian archaeology. That's not just thinking outside the box. That's like launching the box into orbit. But even with such different subjects, there's still this common thread, isn't there? It's like he's always searching for those universal truths, but just looking in the most unexpected places.
Exactly. And that's where his other compositions, even the ones that seem totally different from the Taoist Requiem, start to make sense. Remember that piece you mentioned, The Flapper with a Migraine?
Oh, yeah, the one with the jazz influence. How does that fit in with everything else?
Well, on the surface, it feels about as far away from a Requiem as you can get, right? It's playful, it's energetic, totally rooted in that Roaring Twenties vibe. But think about it this way. You've got this fusion of jazz, this very American art form with the whole flapper aesthetic, this brief, rebellious moment in history. It's another example of Peterson taking these seemingly unrelated elements and weaving them together into something new and completely unexpected.
He's like a cultural alchemist or something,
Yeah,
finding those hidden connections, creating gold out of these surprising combinations. He's not afraid to experiment, to push those creative boundaries.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that willingness to embrace the unfamiliar, to challenge how we think about what music can be, that's what makes his work so captivating. It's not just listening, it's about engaging with the unexpected, letting ourselves be surprised, challenged even, and ultimately changed by the experience.
So where does that leave our listener, the person who's just taken this deep dive into the mind of David Peterson? What's the takeaway, that lasting impression they should walk away with?
I think it's an invitation to be curious, to explore the world around us, even beyond us, with open ears and an open mind. Just like Peterson finds these connections between ancient Taoism and the vastness of space, there are unexpected harmonies everywhere. We just have to be open to hearing them.
And maybe even more importantly, be open to exploring those uncharted territories, those places where our preconceived notions kind of fall apart and we have to face the unknown. Who knows? Maybe there's a bit of David Peterson in all of us, that desire to search for meaning, to connect with something bigger than ourselves, whether it's through music or art or just asking those big questions.
And speaking of big questions, I think Peterson leaves us with one final provocative thought to ponder. If, as he suggests, emptiness is at the heart of the Taoist Requiem, how does that resonate with you? How do you experience emptiness in your own life, in the face of grief, through music, or even when you think about the vastness of space? It's a question that stays with you long after the music ends.
It really does. And with that, we'll leave you to explore the echoes of this deep dive. Until next time, keep those ears open and those minds curious.